Today's case is named as the top #1 most notorious, infamous, unforgettable case in South Korea, even inspiring one of the most famous movies, The Memories of a Killer. And surprisingly, one of the darkest suspects ever was only caught few years ago, like more recently, leading to the discovery of the wrong man behind bars for over 32 years. And surprisingly, this worst, darkest suspect of all time cannot be officially charged with his horrendous crimes ever. This was one of the first cases that I covered on GRAZY TV, but I actually did not have the full information back then. And I didn't tell a lot of details because true crime really wasn't a thing. As crazy as these true crime cases can be, a lot of times it can't be monetized. Just by liking today's video and subscribing, all help. And I just want to show off, I have my hair been looking luscious and super long, you guys. Look how long my hair has grown. As I've been getting older as well, I have been thinking about my hair quality and how hair is such a big part of your presentation. And apparently in this section, I might be at stage 2 of hair loss. I don't have hair loss genes in my family, but with the environment, what you're eating, the stress levels, things can happen. So I've discovered MD Hair, and big shout out to MD Hair for supporting true crime content. MD Hair is very special because they're the first medical grade hair growth treatment customized to the exact cause and type of hair loss. Even if you don't have hair loss and you just want full, luscious looking healthy hair like me, I'm using it, you guys, and I've been loving it. So I took the quick test and I also uploaded where my hair loss concern is, and for me it's like down here. As you can see, it says I'm at stage 2. So they use AI technology to evaluate your hair. It's going to be different depending on where your concerns are. It recommended me a 360 treatment plan where I'm taking care of my hair from inside out. I'm using my customized treatment shampoo, which has been helping me to cleanse and stimulate the scalp for healthy hair growth. It is backed by science with medical grade ingredients and botanical formulas to deliver it right in front of your home. After that, I used my customized treatment serum to apply. So I've been taking the hair wellness supplement, which has 20 different active plant complexes to help support healthy hair growth. I also been adding their collagen to my coffee every single day, so I've been drinking this. So not just for your hair, but if you want an overall health, collagen is amazing to add. Try MD Hair out because they're giving 70% off your first month if you use my code and link. You guys will see my hair growth journey on my Instagram as well, so go follow me there if you want to see. So thank you so much to MD Hair and you guys for supporting my channel. Let's get back to the story. From early 1986 in Hwaseong town of Gyeonggi-do province, a series of assaults and rape cases would happen and it would haunt this town. Back then, we didn't have much way of finding any suspects because there was no CCTVs, there was really no DNA testing, only eyewitnesses, but these cases would happen in the dark, purposely at night. And the Hwaseong town was specifically where these cases would happen was not a city. This was a field of rice and vegetables and people would walk. There was like one bus maybe an hour. So it was a very rural place and it was hard to have surveillances even with witnesses. It was 1986, September 19th, and this is when all hell would start in this town. One day, a 72-year-old grandmother victim, Miss Lee, would be found dead in a grassy field, which is coming back home from seeing her daughter. Now, in this case, there was no evidence of assaults, just a horrific crime, and Miss Lee was reported missing, last seen on the 14th, so it took about 5 days for her to be discovered. Then on October 20th, Miss Park, 25-year-old, would be found, and this is where we're going to start to see the signature of the killer. The word signature has been a hot word when it comes to this case because it means that the killer is specifically leaving clues or specifically leaving his marks on his victims, and it's kind of like an egoistic thing that they do to be like, hey, this was me, this is like something that I only know, and it's as if he's leaving like a mark, a tattoo on the victims for whatever his sick obsessions. Park was found under a sewage or a water tunnel when she went missing. She was on her way home waiting for the bus, and this would also be a pattern where a lot of these women would go missing while waiting for the bus or coming home from the bus late at night. Evidence of assault was found, and back then women would wear a lot of stocking, these kind of clear stockings or colored stockings, and they were actually used to specifically unalive the victim's strangulation. Her money was stolen stolen as well, and this happened near victim number 1. And I believe this was the infamous inspiration that the movie Memory of a Killer used under the sewage water scene. November 30th, victim Kim, 36, would be able to escape from kidnapping and assault. She was actually one of the very rare victims that would ever escape the suspect. So the woman says she was coming home late at night. Again, this is a field, super dark. There is only like maybe one lamp light. She says that someone came from her behind, kidnapped her, and tied her from the back of her arms, again with stockings. So in this case, I believe the suspect now is like bringing stockings to use for his victims. After the assault, the suspect turned around for a moment to steal the victim's money and some of the jewelry that she had. Now, the bag was on the floor, so I get the suspect turned around, went to the bag and started to look for stuff that he wanted to steal, which how low do you have to be? Like, not only are you trying to unalive and assault the victim, but now you're stealing things. Just how low of a human could you even get? Now, the victim says that, while the suspect was doing this, the stocking is pretty stretchy. So she was somehow able to get up and just run, bolted, screaming. And she, again, was one of the sole survivors. Now, unfortunately, it was really dark, and the only thing she was able to hear was his voice. And she claims that she was asked by the suspect, "What does your husband do? How many kids do you have?" And this is the same thing that the same suspect would ask the assault victims prior to his killings. Professionals say that one of the reasons why the suspect probably asked this question was because his hatred and fuel came from wanting to also hurt the victims' families, and he somehow envied like the victim's husband or like the lifestyle that they had. It came from this weird envy and like obsession of wanting to like hurt the person as much as possible. December 12th, victim Kwan, 24 years old, would be found, and she had been missing for over 4 months. She was also a mother as well, a young mother at 24 years old. Now, because it has been 4 months in the field, of course, her body was, not recognizable as much, but they were able to identify her. And this is, again, where the Sikh signature would be a constant pattern, but it would get worse over time. The victim was found with her undergarments over the victim's head. Only 2 days later, December 14th, another victim, Miss Lee, 22 years old, was coming home from the bus, again late at night, and she would be found in the field. And she has been missing for a week since she was found. They found female stockings that was used for strangulation. There was evidence a particular weapon, almost like a hard plastic ball or something, or a aluminum ball, whatever, where they found a consistent evidence with physical assaulting the victim's private area. Now, again, it seems like some cash was stolen, but from here, police did notice a pattern of the suspect not taking precious jewelries, and this could be because maybe the other victim got away and he didn't want to spend too much time trying to steal something from the victim. Fifth victim was found January 10th, 1987. 18-year-old Hong was getting off the bus when she went missing. Again, the same details with the stalking and everything, but this time they found evidence of the suspect urinating on the victim. Again, unfortunately, this was 1987, so they did not have DNA testing. If this happened today, they would be found right away. But as you could see, as more and more time went by, this suspect wanted to use humiliation and insults to let out his anger or whatever it was on these innocent victims. And throughout most of these victims so far, professionals say that there's evidence that after the suspect assaulted the victims, he would kind of almost give a glimmer of hope that the victims were going to come out of this alive by putting the clothing back on the victims, only just to then strangle them and end their life. May 2nd, Miss Park, 29 years old, would be the sixth victim. And I believe this is when the police was really cracking down on this town, because this was where all the victims were found, like in the same area. So the fact that honestly the suspect wasn't really found yet, surprising, but the police were going around the town trying to look for the suspect. Police believe that they actually probably ran into the suspect during their interrogation, but they probably thought that the suspect didn't look like a killer. They probably talked to the killer at some point, but just looked over it because maybe they were imagining certain type of characteristics in their head that did not match the actual suspect. But again, it seems like police were really cracking down on the town, and it could have spooked the suspect because the killing kind of stopped for just a bit. It was over a year later, in 1988, September 7th, Miss An, 54 years old, was getting off the bus and she was on her way back home getting peaches for her husband because her husband really loved peaches. So she was coming back home with like her bag of peaches, and she would be found murdered, found September 7th. And this was the sick part as well. The suspect also had this tendency of using the victim's items, and Miss An was found with pieces of peaches inside of her body. And again, using the victim's items, and not even his own items that he brought, only using the victim's items, which meant that he loved control. Now, thankfully, in this case, in the peaches, they did find the DNA of the suspect, or at least something that was left behind, but this would not be tested until decades later, only saved as evidence because, again, they did not have the technology back then. Now, they believe in this case, or around when this case happened, there was finally a potential witness, and it was a bus driver late at night. He remembers a man like with really dirty shoes, dirty muddy shoes, like waving down the bus to try and get on the bus, and he was like really frantic and hectic, and the bus driver just remembers this guy because it was late at night. There was only like one bus in this town. The bus driver was able to bring a sketch with an artist, and he described this man to have long face, long slit mono eyes, big nose, and thick eyebrows, and he was around maybe mid to late 20s. But again, unfortunately, with no GPS tracking, CCTVs, I mean, once you let go of a person and you drop him off, I mean, who knows the identity or where he went. More victims, 8th and 9th victim, would also be found with similar details, but sometimes not fully. Like sometimes stockings weren't used, but police believing strongly that this was related to the same suspect. But we'll get to later that this 8th and 9th victim wasn't 100% proven even till this day. And another man would go to jail for the 8th victim, and we'll get to this in a bit. So if we were to skip these two victims, let's just say for now, maybe it was related, maybe it wasn't. 2 years later, in 1990, November 15th, the official next victim would be found, and this time was a 13-year-old victim coming home from school. And in Korea, actually, even till this day, there's late night school classes, like literally in school. So she would be walking home in this field. She said goodbye to her friends. It was her usual walk, and while walking back home, she would be kidnapped. Again, same details of using the victim's belongings to unalive the victim. And this time, autopsy showed that it seemed like the suspect was getting all his urges out that he couldn't do for 2 years, because there was a lot of marks on the suspect's chest, like knife marks, almost as if someone was really angry at this person. And thankfully, in this case as well, DNA was found and kept. Now here, you might wonder, well, if the 8th and 9th victim, let's say, wasn't related, I mean, could the suspect kind of stop for 2 years, and what made him stop and certainly turn again with his urges? And criminal profilers say that it's not that they've stopped, it's that they just kind of held on to their urge. And one of the professionals say that when he talked to similar serial killers, they would confess and say that, you know, sometimes they would come back to the location of where they buried the victims and just stand there and kind of like soak in the same emotions and feelings that the suspect felt at the moment by just going to that gravesite. So it's a high possibility that the suspect came back multiple times just to relive those moments again. Now, back then, I believe they only had the power to test the blood type of the suspect or the victim. So they would test the samples and they would say, oh, the suspect is A-type blood or B-type blood. Now, in all of these different cases, they would find different types of blood of suspects as the police were claiming. And what happened later, we find out, was that For example, in one of the victim's clothing, the blood sample that they found, thinking that it belonged to the suspect, actually later turned out to belong to like the victim's husband. So you weren't even sure of like whose blood this was. Like evidence could have been tampered. And because of this, they were looking for the wrong suspect. So later I'll talk about the wrong suspect that was incarcerated, and because of this wrong blood sample, they will be looking for a suspect with blood type B because that's what they believe they found, when the actual real suspect turned out to be blood type O. So now, even if you get the blood sample of the real suspect because it's the wrong blood type, you might dismiss this real killer and incarcerate the wrong person, which is what happened in this case. Now, there would be more victims that could have been possibly related to the same suspect, but even till this day, police don't know. So let's fast forward to 1994. In January, it was snowing, it was a cold winter, and a woman named Lee, she was 19 years old, would be found in the snow in the garage of a villa. And 2 days before she was found, actually her father and her brother-in-law, who was named Lee Chun Jae, would come to the police station seeking to file a missing person's report. So Lee Chun Jae's wife was the sister of this 19-year-old that was found. So who is Lee Chun Jae? One of the most notorious person ever in South Korea. So Lee was married and he had a kid by now. He had a son, and his father-in-law complained that his daughter, his youngest daughter, never came home. And Lee was known to be pretty respectful to his father-in-law. So they decided to go together to search for the daughter and file a missing persons report. Now police would interview Lee, saying that, hey, when was the last time you saw your sister-in-law and things like that. And apparently Lee's story started to change and his alibi did not add up. And he will be asking the police odd questions like, how many years do you get for assault? How many years do you get for murder? Later, police would then search in Lee's house. So technically also the victim's sister-in-law's house, and found blood samples that belonged to this woman. The blood sample of the woman would be found in Lee Chun Jae's bathroom, where police believe that he was indeed the suspect. And here is a police interrogation video. And he would confess that he was the suspect. And look how coward he is. Like after doing all of that, now he's hiding his face, really? So the story went like this. Lee claimed that the sister-in-law would come over frequently and she would always have orange juice at his house. Again, this is his sister's house as well, so she came over to see her nephew and things like that. And he noticed that she had a pattern of always washing her hands before drinking the orange juice. So while she was in the bathroom, he would put a lot of sleeping pills in the orange juice. When she drank it and passed out, he SA'd the victim and used the victim's clothing again to strangle her. Now the controversy comes when Lee claimed that this was not premeditated murder, but that it was just out of the moment. As you guys know, like premeditation and out of the moment is like a different charge. If it was premeditated, you can be sentenced to death, and if it was not, you could get life imprisonment or a lesser sentence. Court ruled that this was premeditated and he was to be sentenced to death, but he appealed. Then in the appeal case, the court ruled that this cannot be proven, that it was premeditated, so he was to be sent to life in prison. Now with good behavior, and this happens throughout many countries, even in life imprisonment, there's like a law where you can be released in 25 to 27 years if you have caused 0 problems in prison. And you can be granted parole, not all the time, but you can be. So Lee was born in 1963, and here's some pictures of when he was in school days. And his family and friends describe him as a very sweet boy and was always quiet when growing up. They also describe him as being bright, with good manners, and never saw any signs that he would have a dark side to him. I can also see that he was kind of not that great looking, let's be honest. At least in the Korean standards, he definitely was not a popular guy. And according to him, if the story is true, he claims that one of his younger brothers actually drowned. That could have caused him in his elementary school, little young boy, like some kind of trigger in him as a trauma. Then he also claimed that a neighborhood older girl was said to be SA'd, and this story was spread throughout the neighborhood, especially back then, Something happens to one neighbor, like everybody knows about it kind of thing. So this also could have somehow triggered something in his mind as he was growing up with his obsessions. Then he will be serving in the mandatory military service. In 1983, he became a tank driver. According to professionals, they also see behaviors of him here loving control, because apparently he loved being a tank driver so much, because being a tank driver, like, you're inside of this tank that nobody can mess around with you. And the soldiers are following the tank, and apparently you feel like a leader. With his short, unpopular frame, him being inside this tank gave him like protection and some kind of power that he never had in his life. So their story is that he actually gave up vacation days because he loved being in the military so much. Being able to maybe have weapons and guns and being able to fight kind of gave him that kind of, again, egoistic power control. After his mandatory service, he would work at a nearby factory, which coincidentally, all the Hwaseong cases would happen. And this was where he lived, so everything was connected. And in 1992, he would get married to his wife, and in 1994 was when he was arrested. And when his wife was interrogated and interviewed about, who Lee was, she broke down, cried and cried and cried to the police, and just finally opened up of what she was going through, hell, for the past 2 years. She describes her marriage life as, again, hell, and Lee would physically assault her many, many times. She would run away, of course, because of the abuse, and she claims that, like, once he got angry, he could not be controlled. He was like a monster. He even threatened her that once she ran away in 1993, that fine, he would agree to a divorce, but would tattoo all over her so she could never get remarried. And back then, tattoo was definitely a taboo. It was not legal. It's still not legal today. And apparently to other men, like father figures and male figures, or people that he felt as was the same level as him, he would not mess with. And it was only the people that he can control where he let out this dark side to. Professionals say that him being able to control the victim's life, whether they get to live or not, was like him feeling like a god. So can you believe that for over 30 years, that the sick Hwaseong, #1 notorious case ever in South Korea, the suspect was never found? The suspect literally went never found up till 2019. Literally only a couple years ago. With better technology, DNA technology, in 2019, police were able to retest a lot of unsolved mystery cases and found a DNA match in some of the Hwaseong cases. Now, not in all of the 10 victims, or 10 plus victims, DNA was found, but you can see that some of them were related. It's an obvious sign that they were related. And there's only DNA database for the criminals. And apparently the real suspect was sitting in jail already for the murder of his sister-in-law, and that was Lee Chun Jae. So police announced that Lee's DNA would be found in the 5th, 7th, and 9th victim. And police and everybody was so shocked because Lee in prison was known to be like a very calm, never causing any trouble kind of guy inside of the prison. Yet he was known to be one of the deadliest person in South Korea. So when investigators presented this evidence to Lee, first he denied it. But the craziest thing is, in my opinion, is the fact that actually there was a statute of limitation. The law has changed now. I believe cases that happened before 2003 or 2001, those have a statute of limitation, but cases that happen after the 2000s do not have statute of limitation. So his cases happened in the 80s and 90s. So all the cases, all the 10 plus victims that he unalived, he could not be charged for. So if he was not found of unaliving his sister-in-law, he would literally be a free man, you guys. So he knew by this time that he could not be charged, so he decided to just tell the police the truth. According to Lee, he wrote that there's up to 15 murders and 30 sexual assault crimes. And he even drew a map of some of the victims that weren't found. So this guy remembered everything to a detail, even 30 plus years later, of what he has done. He's like keeping this in his memories. And the craziest again twist of the story is that Lee confessed that the 8th victim that happened in Hwaseong, he was responsible for. But supposedly the court sentenced another man 30 plus years, claiming that this was the suspect of this little girl that passed away. So the 8th case happened in September of 1988 when a 13-year-old girl was found lifeless in her own home after being assaulted. Autopsy showed that she was strangled by hand, no stocking was used. And if you see the map of this girl's house, it was right next to Lee's house back then. Literally right next door neighbors. So back then, police arrested a 22-year-old man named Yoon. He was working at a factory nearby at some kind of like an oil factory. And police claimed that some of his body hair was found inside of the house. They would lock Yoon up. According to him, he was verbally and physically abused, made to confess. They would not let him sleep, not let him eat, pretty much like psychologically draining him so that he would confess. He remembers writing down a copy of a confession letter. Police gave him a letter for him to write down, and that was used in court as evidence, and they sentenced him for life in prison. Now, if you look back at the evidence, it is so shady. They have no idea where they even got his body hair, because according to the evidence photos, no body hair was ever found. It was only written down in the papers by the police. So it could have been a made-up evidence. It probably was. And going back to the blood samples, apparently they thought that the suspect had blood type B, and this wrong suspect happened to be a blood type B. So to the police, ding, he was a suspect. He worked at an oil company, so everybody who worked in those factories always had almost like black oil hands and feet. And nowhere in the victim's clothing did they find any black oil residue. And although no specific DNA of Lee was found, Lee did confess, and apparently he stood as a witness during the retrial 32 years later trying to free this innocent man. Now, Mr. Yoon actually has some problems in his spine, which causes him to not walk properly, even back then. They believe that the police framed him in order to get like a promotion for themselves. Back then, when you would solve certain cases, you would get promotions, so police would want to find and solve certain crimes, even if it was putting innocent man behind bars. And with no money and power, he was just forgotten by society. He was not even put up with a lawyer. A lot of unfair things had been done to him, and in 2020, Mr. Yoon was finally found not guilty, was freed after 32 years. He was 22 when he was sentenced, so all his youth is gone now. And he did sue the justice system and won, and was ordered to be awarded over about $1 million. Now again, in a lot of the cases, DNA was not found, or at least the samples were not kept because it's been so long. So we can only go off of Lee's words that he was responsible for all these deaths. Or some people claim that maybe all these deaths weren't Lee, that there could have been like a copycat murderer, like someone that saw in the newspaper what's going on and wanted to act upon it, which definitely does happen. Technically, a lot of these cases with no DNA samples, it still technically remains as a mystery unsolved. Now, could it be that Lee is boasting that he did more than he did? Or is he really telling the truth? Or is he actually downplaying how many victims there are? You'll never know. We'll never know. And the fact that he won't be sentenced for all these crimes is just crazy to me. Like, I think there should be special laws for extreme criminals like him. Although technically he's in life imprisonment, and because now everyone, the world, knows what he has done, it is unlikely that he will be released for parole anyway, even if he had good behavior. Again, correction officers, prison mates say that Lee never caused any trouble in the last 20-something years since he's been in prison, which shows you that this guy will not squirm to anyone that he thinks is more powerful than him. So any other men that he believes has power to overpower him, he's like a coward. He knows that if he cannot control the person, he just stays quiet and calm, which is the sickest psychopath thing that you can do. My condolences are for the victims, and the fact that these victims' families only found out the suspect 4 years ago, and knowing the fact that he will never be punished for these crimes. Like, I would be so angered as a family member. I don't even know what I would have done. Leave a comment down below what you guys have thought about today's case. Remember to like this video. I reply to all my early birds, and check out MD Hair if you guys want some luscious full regrowth of hair. See you in my next video.